All right. So today or here we're going to talk about the last of the Olympian gods, Dionysus and Hephaestus. And Well, um, I guess I could have done Dionysus with, or I'm sorry, Hephaestus with his wife Artemis. It sort of just ends up here in the end, really great sort of Gamos or to deal with. Dionysus and Hephaestus interaction. So they just are going to go together here at the end. So I'm going to begin with Dionysus. Um, Dionysus is important for both the Greeks and for the Romans. He's it's interesting. Sort of like something interesting that happens in Rome when sort of a cult of Dionysus comes into the city. But he's important because he is the god of wine, which is part of Mediterranean trade, part of the Mediterranean world altogether. Some of his other names are Bacchus and Bromius. Not he's maybe he is a bro, but he this is because of his onomatopoeia. It's the boom, the one who rumbles or the one who booms. He is known as Bacchus in Rome, also sometimes as Liber. Dionysus is a god of nature, animals, abundance. He's the god, of course, of wine. God of wine, God of fun in general, God of illusion. A god of the theater and a god of impersonation. And we'll sort of see that come into play when we talk about the city Dionysia. We talk about Greek tragedy. He is the only. Oh, he's a bringer of joy, but also can be a great bringer of destruction. When he returns to the city, his mother city of Thebes, where the city his mother was from, she's the daughter of the king. He returns and he essentially destroys his own family because they refuse to believe that he is a god. So he's a god that requires devotion, a god that requires devotion. He's actually the only Olympian deity whose parents are not both gods. Later, Hercules will come in, Heracles will come in, but Dionysus is the first. His mother is the mortal Semele, and I'll talk about her more here in a minute. So the god of vines, often when you see depictions of Dionysus, there are several ways you can identify him. Of course, we have this amphora here on the left with these little satyrs, which we'll talk about satyrs here in a little bit. We have the satyrs picking grapes, Dionysus in the center, drinking from a kylix, which you often see him drinking out of. This is a Greek drinking vessel, is double-handed Greek drinking vessel. He's often crowned with a vine crown, um, and he is depicted holding a thyrsus, which is this acorn thing. So on The picture on the right, just above his right arm, is this acorn thing. This is the thyrsus, which his followers also carry. And he's normally draped in a leopard skin. And this has to do with, and actually, normally in depictions of him, if he's in a chariot, he's in a chariot being pulled by leopards. He has an association with the East, which has a lot to do with where, not only maybe where the deity Dionysus comes from, but wrapped up in a lot of his early myths. So there is a physical manifestation of this worship of Dionysus in the city of Athens. In Athens, they celebrate a festival, the city Dionysia. This picture here actually is a picture of the theater of Dionysus. This is to just below the agora. So this, if you look at this wall here behind the temple, those little ruins in the sort of on the left, just above the. So if there are three trees on the theater of just north of the center one, that's the Parthenon. So this is just beside the Greek Acropolis, the Athenian Acropolis. Every March, people would bring their crops, their grains to the city, and there would be a celebration involved. As part of this, tragedies would be performed. Tragedies, and you know, there are lots of different sort of translations for tragedy. One of them is goat song. When actually Dionysus as a baby is turned into a goat by Zeus to protect him from his wrath. And we'll get into that more later. So this is sort of maybe where the word tragedy comes from. You know, there's debate for that. As part of the city Dionysia, there would be an image of Dionysus carried from a sanctuary to the city. To the theater. Much like the Panathenaea festival for Athena, this would be this sort of festival for Dionysus. Like I said, tragedies, the theatrical performances would be complete. There would be a competition of three tetralogies, which is a little redundant, but you basically had three playwrights write a set of three tragedies in one satyr play, which is meant to be like a farce. And each would have a day for the performance of their tragedies. The performances would involve actors on stage wearing masks. This, of course, gets at the idea of Dionysus as this god of theater and impersonation, where a mask is literally a symbol of the transformation of identity. These are great representations. I mean, these things would have been very lifelike, very lifelike. There are these actually. What I have here on the left is this is a tragic mask on the left, a comedic mask on the right. This is a marble of a tragic mask, but these are made of things like, I mean, almost like paper mache and like hair. I mean, these are meant to be very lifelike, very lifelike. Like I said, here we have a downward, from the Acropolis, look at the theater of Dionysus. Originally, this theater is built mostly out of like like wood and things like that, and it dates back to as early as like the 6th century BC. By the 4th century BC, where Athens at its height, the theater is not no longer out of. Oh, I should mention the theater. The theater only refers to the orchestra, and the theater is like the backdrop. The seats would have just people would have sat on this natural slope. Eventually, like permanent seats are put in by the 4th century. Like I said, where when Athens is at its height of power. As this more permanent structure is built, not only do you have the permanence of the structure being built, so the monumental side of it, but you also have playwrights to sort of match the spectacle of what the theater was. So originally, most um, most of these plays, the oldest ones, are said to have been created by Thespis. So you actually get the word thespian from this. Thespis, there would be so basically there was always the chorus is a large part of the play, which actually so the chorus is a large part of the play. These would be non-professionals who would basically sing and dance. They would be picked at random. There were 12 of them. They would basically wear costumes and masks, and they would chant. They would chant these sort of these songs. And if I can find one, I actually saw a clip where they're sort of like rethinking what this sounded like. If I can find that clip, I'll post it. I'll have it posted on the Moodle page, or I'll post it on the Moodle page. There would be, I mean, at first there was no interaction. You have basically the protagonist, literally the first actor on stage, essentially giving monologues, and then the chorus would come in and sing, and that would be sort of how the action would move. Eventually, by the 4th century, we have the introduction of the deuteragonist, the second actor by the playwright Aeschylus. We'll talk about Aeschylus here in a second. Later, the tritagonist, the third actor, is introduced on stage by Sophocles. And so what we start to have is more interaction between the characters on the stage. And in some ways, I mean, the action on the stage matters when you have multiple actors on the stage interacting with one another, with dialogue between one another. This has got to be this representation. I mean, we have Hercules. This could be was it Sophocles's Hercules? No, it's not, one of his Hercules plays. I'm not sure, but definitely this is meant to be Hercules, and maybe Dionysus. Maybe Dionysus. And you can see them holding the masks, and like this representation of like how realistic those masks supposed to be. Yeah, this has got to be Dionysus and Hercules. Now that I'm looking at it. So I mentioned Aeschylus and Sophocles. Essentially, by the 4th century, like I said, just to match the wonder of the physical theater, we had these three Greek playwrights who are said to have been the best. What's interesting is of all of the Greek tragedians that there ever were, we have complete plays from exactly three of them. Can you guess who they are? Our big three. Not to be confused with LeBron James, Wade, and Chris Bosh. This is the Greek big three: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aeschylus is in the generation before Sophocles and Euripides, but Sophocles and Euripides are pretty much contemporaries. They actually pass away. They actually die the same year. They're in the same year. So Aeschylus is writing tragedies from 399 to 456 BC. I say the date of the Oresteia. You might not know what that is, but of not all of these, like I mentioned, only three of the playwrights' plays survive, and only a handful of their plays survive. So just looking at the statistics, so he writes between 70 and 90 plays, and only 7 of his plays survive. So less than 10% of his plays survive. One of his um, tragedy. So I want to make a quick difference here. So when I'm talking, so there's a thing, the tragedy. I mean, is so a tragedy doesn't really consist of one play. It's the 3 plays that go together. By the time of like Aristotle, so in the 3rd century BC, or the late 4th century BC, it became in vogue to perform these plays, these tragedies one at a time. But for the Athenian audience, they would have viewed them 3 at a time every time. And a lot of the playwrights would have one continuous story for all 3. We only actually have one of these complete 3 plays that go together, the tragedy, the tetralogy. We only have one of these in modern day that is complete, and that is what's called the Oresteia. It's 3 plays, the Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, and then the Furies or the Eumenides. We'll talk about that tragedy, that tetralogy, later, because it deals with, well, Agamemnon probably is a name that sounds familiar. But when we talk about the House of Atreus, we'll talk about those 3 plays because they deal with some of the last members of the House of Atreus. So he has 13 victories. And like I said, 7 of his plays are. We know the Oresteia wins. So I don't think I mentioned that. So these are judged. Competitions are judged. To come in first place is a great honor. To come in first place 13 times, that's a real big deal. That's a real big deal. So if he writes between 70 and 90 plays, that means he's probably at most entering into the competition 30 times. At most 30 times. Invited to the competition, which I should mention are only 3 playwrights. These aren't the only guys writing. There are hundreds of these. Hundreds of playwrights. And he's selected, of maybe the 33 years he's writing, 30 times. And he wins 13 of those, nearly half. Nearly half. This dude's the New England Patriots, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the 90s Bulls. He's going. He's got as good a chance as any to win. I might have you guys read the Oresteia. We'll see. I'm going to think about that. So the next playwright, Sophocles. So he's writing tragedies between 468 and 404 BC. So if you look back, if you look at the years, so 468, 456. So these guys these kind of guys. So Aeschylus and Sophocles are overlapping for about 10 years. Now, Sophocles maybe maybe he's more like the Patriots or the 90s the 90s Bulls. But he writes around 120 plays. So this represents probably about 40 years of performance of 40, maybe 40 instances of getting in. He wins 24. So again, around half. Just like and you probably, my guess is if you've read any of the of these playwrights, you've read Sophocles. Sophocles, of course, is the tragedian who pens Oedipus Rex. Another play you might have read is the Antigone. He pens the Antigone. So of his more than 100 plays, again, only 7 survive. So few. So here we have Sophocles and Aeschylus. Between them, we're talking 50 or 60. Let's look. Let's What is it? Essentially, um, let's say 90 years, 90 years of domination, or 90 years of writing, 35, 40 victories, 35 victories. And of them we don't even have all of their victories. 7 plays. Again, he introduces this third, and he's the one who introduces this third actor on stage. Again, I mean, the last of these is Euripides. So he is writing plays. He starts writing just after he stops writing plays. I should mention that Aeschylus, he wins the Orsai. He wins posthumously. He dies before the performance. So Euripides 456 to 406 BC. He writes around 90 plays, but he only has 5 victories. Euripides is not that popular, and yet we have 19 of his plays survive. The least I mean, it's not like he's bad. He just wasn't popular in his time. He's actually seen much more popularity in our time. We're gonna eventually, when we cover women in the ancient world, we're actually going to talk about some of Euripides' plays, and in particular about the Medea, which deals with Medea, who is the quote unquote witch who assists Jason retrieve the golden fleece. We're going to talk about the Bacchae a little bit. We're going to mention some Sophocles. We're going to talk about Antigone and Aeschylus. We're going to talk about Clytemnestra. So we're going to talk about some of these powerful women who we see as characters inside of these Greek tragedies. I mentioned that Homer and Hesiod, a lot of the stories we have of the gods are from Hesiod. We also get a lot of the recounting of a lot of our stories that we know also come from Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, particularly the stories of heroes, and kings. But we do see how certain gods operate. It's at the end of the Oresteia that we see the trial where Apollo acts as a defense attorney, and Athena acts as a judge and as they sit on the Areopagus in Athens. The Bacchae, we see Dionysus come back to Thebes and enact vengeance on his family. Actually, let's talk about that. We're going to go ahead. We're going to jump ahead to the next slide. I'll talk about Maenads, who were these female followers of Dionysus. Here we have this Maenad in the center. not only she's got the leopard here carrying a thyrsus crowned with a snake. So a rough synopsis of Euripides' Bacchae is Dionysus has returned to Thebes from the east to declare himself a god among the Greeks. What better city to do that in than the city of his mother? Now I need to pause here. Backstory. So Semele is the daughter of Cadmus. Is it Cadmus? That seems right. We'll just say Cadmus. Yeah, the daughter of Cadmus. She has a lover who is constantly visiting her. Hera comes to her and says, "Oh, you look so happy. Who's this lover? I don't really know. You should get him to make you a promise. To promise to do whatever you ask." So she gets Zeus to agree to do whatever she asks. Well, Zeus, remember, cannot, because he enforces oaths. If he swears an oath, then he has to keep it. He swears that he'll do whatever she wants. And Hera convinces her to ask, "Show me your true form." Well, Zeus's truest form, of course, is a lightning bolt. Zeus, having to fulfill this promise, he takes off his human guise, shows himself as a lightning bolt, frying Semele, turning her into dust. The only thing that survives is little baby Dionysus. Little baby Dionysus. Dionysus is known as twice born. This is the first of those births. Twice born Dionysus. The infant, Zeus takes the infant, the unborn child, sews him into his thigh, cuts open his thigh, sews him into his thigh, and there Dionysus grows into a baby. Okay. Dionysus is eventually born. This is actually where he gets his association with being a goat. To hide him, so he's hidden in the east, in India, in some versions of the story, up near the Black Sea, in some versions of the story. But he's hidden. He's turned into a goat. This is where the idea of the goat comes from, by Zeus to hide him from Hera. So he returns to Thebes to declare himself a god. But what he finds is that the sister of his mother, whose at least one, so whose names are Agave. Let's see, what are the so Agave. It's important because, yeah, Agave, Eno, and Autone, Autone. We actually already met Autone's son. We remember Actaeon, the guy who was ripped apart by his own hunting dogs because he saw Artemis naked. This is Dionysus's cousin. Dionysus' cousin. They're all related. Dionysus' cousin. So Dionysus comes to the city, and all of the women of the city are captivated by his rites. They all leave the city and go into the countryside, where they're frolicking in the countryside. performing the rites of performing the rites of Dionysus. His sister being one of those women who were out performing these rites. Then Dionysus goes into the city and convinces the king. So Cadmus is no longer the king. His son Pentheus is the king. Convinces Pentheus, who is amassing an army to go bring the women back in the city. I can get you. I could dress you up like a woman, and you could go out there and see what they're doing. Pentheus, who has made it illegal to worship Dionysus, is now duped by Dionysus. Oh, I should mention he captures Dionysus and brings him to the city, and then listens to this advice that Dionysus can show him what the women are doing out in the countryside. This, of course, piques his interest. Dionysus dresses him up like a woman, and they leave the city. Helps Pentheus climb a tree as he's watching voyeuristically at his mother and all of these women perform these. I mean, the implication is these, very much like sort of like an orgy, that these women are frolicking naked and they're doing all of these things. And as he's watching, Dionysus betrays him, calls all of their attention, and he put in there as they're captivated by this um, fervor of Dionysus, this otherworldly fervor of Dionysus. They can't see Pentheus as anything more than a leopard or a lion. The women freak out, and instead of running away, they chase after the lion. They rip him limb from him as Pentheus screams. His mother dealing the death blow, ripping his head off, then returning to the city, still in this Dionysiac frenzy, with the head of her son in her arms, believing it's the head of a lion, bragging about how they were able to take on a lion with their own hands. In horror, Cadmus sees his son, or his grandson, I'm sorry, head in his daughter's arms. Dionysus gets his revenge, destroys Pentheus, who refuses to worship him, destroys Agave, who refuses to worship him. You better recognize Dionysus as a god. This demonstrates different elements of this Dionysiac ritual, which are homophagia and sporagmos. Homophagia, literally the devouring of raw flesh. As they're ripping Pentheus limb from limb, they're eating his flesh too. And sporagmos, literally the tearing of an animal limb from limb. The idea is that they would tear these, when you were in this Dionysiac frenzy, you would just rip animals apart and eat their raw flesh. So sporagmos and homophagia. We also have these male followers of Dionysus, which are known as satyrs. Satyrs are often depicted as playing music. They love to party. They love to party. They're always the life of the party here. We have one balancing this kylix on the tip of his penis, a great party in the ancient world, apparently, that only this satyr could perform. And I do apologize if um I can leave these, like, something one thing this is a little side note. One thing that the Greeks and the Romans too, but especially the Greeks, are not, I mean, they do depict, I mean, things on their pottery. If if you want me to, like, steer away from some of these things, I can. You just need to let me know and I can take them out of the PowerPoints. So if it's a problem, just let me know. And I apologize if anyone gets bothered by these. If if it's some sort of trigger, I do apologize. So please do let me know. So we have these satyrs, these male followers of Dionysus. They love their wine. Very often, and apologies, um, the Maenads and of course the satyrs, as part of this Dionysiac frenzy, would sleep with one another. Here we have several of these. I mean, you know, here's the satyr. Here's the inside of one of these shallow drinking vases. The idea is you would drink this wine, and I had a professor to share like this. So you would drink the wine, and there would be paintings on the inside. And as you drank the wine, you would see what was going to be coming later in the evening. Here we have the flute players, but pairing off of people, presumably for sex. This one on the left is also on the inside of one of these drinking vases. Another story associated with Dionysus. Dionysus comes up a lot if you haven't noticed. He probably could be a lecture just in and of himself. One of these satyrs, and sort of the leader of the satyrs, his name is Silenus. King Midas, who maybe you've heard of course, King Midas, who touches everything and turns it into gold, captures Silenus to hear his life philosophy. Silenus's philosophy are two parts. First, it's best not to be born at all. The second, to die as soon as possible. Live young, die fast. Live young, die beautiful. Whatever whatever the phrase is. Midas, for the release of Silenus, is offered any gift that he of his choosing by Dionysus. Midas, being selfish, asks to be able to touch anything he touched to be turned to gold. Well, he doesn't mean anything. But of course, this is another thing maybe we'll learn, that hopefully we'll learn over the course of the semester. You don't ask the gods for anything, because if you do, it's not going to be what you expect. He asked to be able to touch everything he touched to turn to gold, not thinking that, well, I can never literally touch anything ever again. Not my children, not my wife, not myself, nothing. And after he turns, begs to be released from his power. Dionysus is kind, releases him, but he grows these donkey ears. Here we have this representation of Midas with his donkey ears on the left. On the right, so if you go to modern day Turkey and the Turkish countryside, so um, Midas is the king of Phrygia, and actually, which is in modern day Turkey. You can actually go to a place that has been identified as basically where Midas's capital city was. I mean, there is a funeral mound. Um, and it's Gordium is the name of the city. Gordium is the name of the city. There's a mound in Gordium that is supposedly the tomb of Midas. Um, there was when they had dug into that mound, unearthed that tomb. This is actually a plaster mold of the body that they found in there. If this is King Midas, this is what King Midas really looked like. Anyway, little side note. Other stories of Dionysus. As Dionysus is coming from the east, or from the east to the west, Dionysus interacts with pirates and is abducted because they think he's the son of a king. His glory is impossible to hide. The workers, the helmsmen, the people who work the boat are afraid, and they can tell something is up. They want to free him. But the captain wants the ransom that he might bring. As they're in the water, a grapevine literally starts to grow up the tree, or up the mast. The men jump into the ship and are changed into dolphins. This is the story of how dolphins came to be. Dolphins by um, Dionysus. Again, this god of sort of of changing, of disguise. We also see Dionysus come in contact with the story of Theseus, in that Ariadne, who is um, the princess on Crete, the daughter of King Minos, who helps Theseus through the labyrinth and to kill the Minotaur. We'll get into that later. Theseus abandons her on the island of Naxos so he can marry her younger sister Phaedra, who again will come in contact with later because he's not exactly loyal to her either. There, Dionysus finds her there on the beach weeping, falls in love with her, and marries her there on the island of Naxos. So I mentioned the chariot. Actually, this is a famous painting of the marriage of Dionysus and Ariadne. Here we have his leopard drawn, Dionysus' leopard drawn chariot. We have Silenus, the satyr here on the left. We have another little goat hoof thing here. We have Maenads playing cymbals and in jubilation here. The Bacchic rites room. So we're actually told by we in Rome there start to basically pop up these religious cults. I mean, Christianity would be considered one of these religious cults. There are lots of them. It's sort of like with the the cult of Persephone and Demeter, the Elysian cult. Bacchus sort of has this real world cult where people would get together, they would in secret, and they would drink, and they would have like these like sex parties, and they would supposedly eat human flesh, and like all of these different things. And this is supposedly going on in Rome. We actually know that the worshippers of who sort of are worshiping with these Bacchic rites are actually expelled from the city of Rome. This was made illegal in Rome. Here we have Livy sort of talking about that. And why this is important is because, I mean, Well, the conception of religion now, right, is that we have these stories, we have these moralistic stories that we're told about gods and goddesses, or gods, God. We're learning moral stories, right? Morals from, God asks us to do this, not do that, to worship like this, not worship like that. The same thing happens with some of these religions in these quote, I'm going to use religions loosely here, in Greece and Rome. And but these groups come to represent something where, like, you would go if you'd offer a sacrifice in public. This is a very, very public manifestation. But there was fear of the private manifestation of some of these. The fear of the private manifestation of some of these, because when they weren't done in open, when they were done in secret, then people didn't know what was going on, right? Oh, I gotta know what's going on in that building over there right now. Right? Not being naturally inquisitive. And so, like I said, the Romans, and actually, like I said, they're expelled from Rome. Yeah, that's all I got for Bacchus. I feel like I'm ending on sort of a letdown, but I've talked about Dionysus for quite a bit. So, but I mean, of course, what's important to remember from the story of Dionysus is that, like, it's the recognition, right? This idea. Well, I mean, some people would argue that, well, the Greeks didn't really believe in these gods. They didn't really worship these gods. And yet, what is the story of Dionysus? The Bacchae, written in the 400s BC. Well, you might not believe in him, but if you don't believe in him and he is real and he returns to the city, you are screwed, because he's going to demand you worship him. And if you don't, you're going to die. You're going to be ripped limb from limb by your mom, eaten by your aunts. So it sort of gets at this idea of, you know, if Dionysus isn't real, then what's it hurt to worship him or not? If he is real, well, it's pretty scary. and that and again, this is something that I've talked about a lot, right? The duality. Worshipping Dionysus is pretty fun. You get to get drunk. You get to do all of these other things. Yay! Lots of fun had by all. Party, party, party. Don't you get to die. All right. So let's move